Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. How you all doing out there, gang? I've got a treat for you guys today because I'm going to introduce you to James White, and he's the general manager of a company called Varnish Software. And although you might be thinking, I've not heard of these, they are a high-performance content delivery network, which works with the top 5 streaming providers throughout the US. And the company also delivers advanced solutions for customers, but also helps them grow revenue, reduce costs, and increase profitability. But today's guest is going to share more about his background and technical expertise, having spent the last 5 years working to help customers deliver optimized content via streaming, web delivery, and even building their own content delivery network. Speaking of which, I also want to explore why he believes the industry needs to build instead of rent content delivery networks. We'll talk about all that and much more. So let's get James onto the podcast right now. So, massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So thanks for having me on, Neil. My name is James White and I work for Varnish Software. So we provide content delivery and web acceleration solutions. Currently, 16% of the world's top 10,000 sites use Varnish. And we're also responsible for the long-term stable releases of the Varnish Cache open source project, which is used on 10 million active websites worldwide at last count. So my role here is I head up all of the commercial parts from new business to account management. And I'm also the general manager, or I guess my title is I'm the general manager for Varnish Software Inc., which we've recently just opened our new headquarters in Los Angeles at the beginning of the year.
And you've been on an incredible journey, you guys, because I read that you've spent over 5 years working to help customers deliver optimized content via streaming, web delivery, and even building your own content delivery network. So can you just bring everyone up to speed with the work that you've been doing over the last 5 years?
Sure. So I joined Varnish, it was 2014. And we were talking a lot at the time around accelerating dynamic content online. That was the big sort of phrase at the time. And then I started speaking to a company called 365, who are now Vodafone Iceland. So this would have been in 2015. And they were looking at building a CDN for their new OTT offering. So the content was stored in AWS, which obviously wasn't in Iceland, probably in Ireland somewhere. And they needed a CDN to reduce the latency from where the content lives to getting it to people's devices or in their homes to consume the content. And they were looking at kind of the standard CDN offerings, but none of them actually had POPs or points of presence in Iceland. So they would have kind of had the same problem around the latency. But 365 at the time, Vodafone had, they actually had data centers in Reykjavik. So we started working with them around putting a couple of caching nodes in Reykjavik, each side of the city, to deliver this content, to help them deliver this content. We flew up there, and I think in about an afternoon, we built this CDN that was then ready to go for them launching the new OTT service. So that was kind of the first case of when, rather than just accelerating content, we were actually looking at the delivery part of it. How do we help companies do this? And luckily, they're still a customer to this day. And the OTT offering's been really successful. But I think that was kind of one that really sticks out in kind of the first one. But helping customers kind of optimize or increase their web delivery on a more, if you like, international scale. So I'm not sure if you remember when the Tesla Model S was released.
Yes.
So super popular car, right? They put a lot of money into marketing. You can imagine you buy this car or you take delivery of this car, and cars, I don't know if you're a car fan, but they have this wonderful kind of ability to turn adults into children when you're sitting inside of them, right? So what you have in Tesla is you actually can watch videos and learn how to do things in the car. And that's kind of the first thing everyone does when they get with a car after driving it, sort of fiddle around with the things in it. But what the issue that Tesla had was that these videos were actually taking quite a long time to load in the car. So you can imagine, right, you're sitting there, you've bought this great machine, you're excited, and then you're like, I'm waiting for a video to load in my new car. This isn't really what I expected.
Yeah.
So you've got a great machine, but a really bad service. So the challenge Tesla had was that these videos were being served over and over again from the origin. And that was what was causing the delay, because it's just not efficient. And obviously, Tesla and the Model S was sold worldwide. So you had people in China, you had people in Africa, you had people in Europe, all consuming this content and sitting and watching it in their cars or engaging with it through their cars. So I guess in true Tesla style, they're known, right, for their kind of startup mentality. They said, how can we leverage what we've already got, which is the network and the hardware, to fix this problem? Because we can't just keep adding boxes, because they're serving content now on such a kind of global scale that more boxes won't improve that. So they looked at needing a CDN or using a CDN to deliver this content. And these are 2 gig video files in some cases. So they looked at CDNs, and the challenge they had was that certain CDNs didn't have coverage where they needed it. One of them was in China, because a lot of CDNs back then weren't allowed to host and to store content in China. And generally for them, they wanted something that they had more control over, because these are really important videos. These are safety things. These are updates to cars. It's everything that the car needs that gets pushed over the internet is via this CDN. So we started working with them, and we put caching nodes where they need them amongst their existing infrastructure and hardware and across their network. And that was a really big, I think that was the first kind of real global one, where they now have customers downloading maybe 20, 30,000 downloads a day of these 2 gig files, which are being served seamlessly to customers. So if you think about it, they've got no new hardware. They've actually, in some cases, reduced the amount of hardware they were using. No major improvements to the network or wholesale changes, but they've actually got a real big performance improvement, which has been massive for their company. And I'm sure, as we've all seen, Tesla have gone on to be pretty successful. So they're kind of 2 different examples of, local, small and global, but ones that really stick out in how we've worked with companies to help them with delivery of content.
And I love the unique approach you're taking at Varnish Software. But I've got to ask the question here. Why do you think that the industry needs to build instead of renting content delivery networks now?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think people kind of automatically assume if you're for one, you're anti the other, right?
Yeah.
And we're not, actually. We work with Akamai. We have an Akamai connector that works really well, and we have other sort of CDN plugins that allow Varnish to be used alongside other CDNs. Because generally, when we speak to our customers and prospects alike, a multi-CDN strategy seems to be becoming more and more common. If your content that you deliver is a large part of your revenue or a large part of your business, then generally you're using multiple CDNs or multiple ways of delivering it. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. In some cases, we work with organizations that use 3 or 4 CDNs, and often Varnish is generally the most performant per node. I mean, in some instances, you're getting 150 gigabits delivery on a caching node. There's not many other CDNs that offer that, but you've also then got control of the delivery, which if you're going to be using 3 or 4 or something, you'd think one of them you'd want to have some control over. So I think that's one example where, as part of a multi-CDN strategy, we definitely advocate that one of the delivery mechanisms that you're using is one that you have control over. But I think on the second part of that, and the kind of the flip side of it, we see more and more sort of content creators, if you like, spin up. You get more local content. If you think about the US, you have state news. If you think about in Europe, you have really country-specific kind of websites and platforms that are serving content. So I think the best example of this is SFR. So they're the French telco. They're the second biggest behind Orange. And they were looking at improving their delivery. And they realized that 90% of their consumers are in France. You have a few other countries that speak French outside of it, but they didn't have a huge amount of traffic from that audience. So it was all in France. And they said, well, we're either going to have to use an additional CDN to get more coverage and better performance, but all of the CDNs are generally in the same area. And we don't actually need more CDN. That's not what we need. What we need is better coverage. And obviously, where they were a telco, they had existing data centers and places where they could put caching nodes. So they actually built their own CDN and removed the existing CDN because it only had one point of presence, or maybe 1 or 2 points of presence in France, and they could completely rip that apart. Because when people talk about sort of edge computing, if you like, edge computing is at the edge of a network on a CDN. Our edge computing is where you want to put us. So it's a completely different proposition. So we worked with them, and they built a CDN that covered all of France. And what they were actually able to do was to resell this CDN as a service to other customers in France. That are all serving content in France. So it was I think they're kind of two different examples of where a build your own CDN, if you like, makes sense. But we're not against the standard model. We just think that there's certainly a market, and there's some user cases that really fit a DIY CDN, as it were.
And we will have quite an eclectic mix of people listening. We'll have techies listening, and also a lot of business leaders and decision makers. So for those people, can you possibly expand on how companies can actually benefit from a web and API acceleration that is both faster and scalable?
Yeah, so generally it's lower latency for users. And this is done via two things, right? So if you're using caching, what it means is you don't need to recompute each response. So we can produce it much faster. But if you can put those caching nodes much closer to the users, delivery time is reduced. So I would say they're probably the two biggest parts from an end user perspective of how you can benefit from sort of web and API acceleration.
And can you also tell me about the importance of providing streaming viewers a fast experience in an oversaturated market? Because there is so much going on there at the moment. It's such a crowded marketplace, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a really competitive space to operate in. So the best example of this, I think, is probably the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
So if you think you have several providers showing the same thing, and the majority of the audience is all in the same place, right? So how do you distinguish between which provider you choose? The general driver is maybe commentators. Apart from that, the next thing is performance, right? That's what you're looking at, is how am I going to make sure that I'm not disturbed whilst I watch, for a lot of people, kind of the biggest game of the year. So I always think a classic example and a good way of demonstrating this is if you're an absolute football fan and you can imagine you're watching the Super Bowl and the neighbor next door is watching the Super Bowl on a different platform and they're cheering 2 or 3 seconds before you are. It's killed the experience, it's ruined it. And I think that's kind of where you see, and where from an end user perspective, where you feel the pains of not being with kind of the best or the most performant platform out there. And we actually, I think it was probably about 3 or 4 years ago, we started working with a company who they were showing the Super Bowl for the first time. So you can imagine huge investment in terms of getting the rights, in terms of marketing. And they wanted, and their goal was that they needed to be in the top 2 platforms or providers of showing this event. That was what they were targeted on. That was what they wanted to do. And they were worried that the CDNs, the multiple CDNs they were using, were going to put too much of a strain on the origin and actually having a real kind of detrimental effect on this. And it's kind of a good and bad problem to have, right? Because it's bad that you're worried about your setup, but it's good that you get that many people watching on your platform. So we started working with them and we helped them when we looked at them. But I think that highlighted how concerned and how important performance was to them. And actually it did happen, and they used Varnish. And luckily, I think they achieved their objective, because they were actually going to launch, and they did launch, that they were showing sporting events, or were going to show live sporting events off the back of this Super Bowl performance. So it was really, really big for them. But I think that's a good example of how you can see how important performance is from a customer perspective to watching it, but also from a supplier and a technology perspective and being the people that are delivering it.
Yeah, I had a similar experience with that over the Christmas period when Amazon was streaming all the Premiership games over here. It was great. A lot of people felt that it was probably a refreshing change from the Sky Sports offering, and it just seemed a little bit fresher, and there's so many different more things going on. But the game seemed to be about 20 seconds behind. So anyone following on Twitter, or if you've got notifications on your phone or your watch or anything, you get a notification for the goal before it actually went in.
Yes, yeah, and it's it has a really sort of detrimental effect, I think, on the the experience and of your it sort of confuses the whole thing. And are you a big football fan or?
Well, I support Derby County, so that's debatable.
Oh yeah, it's tough times. Tough times. Yes, yeah. We've had a rough few years, so the last thing you need is delays in the delivery of it.
So, as for Varnish Software, though, and your content delivery solution, can you tell me a little bit more about that and what it is that's different about what you offer businesses?
Sure. So we have three solutions. We have the DIY CDN, which is basically the core components you need to build a CDN. So that will have things like persistence and high availability. And then we have a streaming server, which is for delivering video content, basically. So that will include things like prefetch and the massive storage engine, which allows you to store kind of your whole VOD catalog in cache, which is really big. And then we have our web and API, which has things like parallel ESI to just improve the performance of your static website, if you like. So I think for us, what's different around what we offer to companies is two things. One is the control part. We really advocate and we work with organizations to help them take ownership of the delivery and the acceleration of their content. And the other one is performance, because as I said, there's not many companies that can offer kind of 150 gigabit video delivery from a single server. And there's not a huge amount of companies that need that at the moment, but this level of service is something that I think highlights how serious we are about performance and how seriously we take it. I think control and performance are probably the two biggest two from using Varnish.
And do you have any examples of how you're helping customers grow revenues, reduce costs, and increase profitability using this technology just to help bring it to life?
Well, luckily there are several, I think. But I think a good example is CBC, so the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. Yeah. So they have, or at the time, they had around 6 million visitors and 30 million page views a day. So this is big numbers, right? And the challenge they had was that they had lots of origins, lots of boxes that were serving this content. And what they wanted to do, their goal, and they were really clear about it, was that they wanted to make the stack simpler, so take out some of the complexity. And by doing that, ultimately boost the performance, which is quite a tough request if you think about it. What they're basically saying is we want to do more with less. So we worked with them, and by putting two Varnish caching nodes in front of their origins, they were able to go from 12 origins to 6. They were able to serve all those 6 million visitors a day, and actually fundamentally get better performance and take out the complexity of their stack. And obviously, with things like that, you take out the OPEX cost goes down because there's less people running and there's less machines to run. The CapEx cost goes down because you're not keep buying more machines, if you like, keep scaling sideways. So I think that was probably one of the best examples of where we've had a company that come to us with a really clear objective, and we've been able to actually help them in doing that. And on top of that, get better performance for them.
So as a pioneer in high performance content delivery and someone that works with the major top 5 streaming providers in the US, what have been the biggest lessons that you've learned throughout your career?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think versatility. Yeah. Versatility has been really important because everybody needs high performance delivery. Everyone thinks that their site has to be the fastest, and that's what they want. But everyone everyone needs a slightly different feature set. Everyone needs slightly different components. So having kind of a good core of capabilities, but you can then build around based on what customers need has been really useful. And I think for us, one of the things we champion internally, so right away from engineering to sales, if you think of those as the two kind of polar opposites and everything in between, is being customer centric. Because it's no good working with some of the biggest, not just streaming providers, but biggest websites, biggest content creators on the globe, and not taking those lessons and kind of filtering them down into your product set to offer to the wider market. And I think working with customers and kind of understanding what are the problems that they're not necessarily facing now, but what they might be facing in 12, 18 months time and addressing them for them and then opening them up to the rest of the market has been really good. So that kind of customer centric approach, I think, that we take as a company gives us at least a good chance to service the top tier customers, if you like, and mid tier and all the way through the market.
Now, we are both locked down at the moment, and everybody listening are probably locked down wherever they live in the world. But it's especially difficult for you because I know you are preparing to move to LA and almost caught in limbo at the moment. But what's next for Varnish Software, and what will life look like on the other side of the global pandemic?
Yeah, I think it's the question everyone's asking themselves and each other at the moment, isn't it? But I think the world post COVID-19, whenever that is, will be different. And in some areas, I think it'll be really different because I think it'll sort of speed up the next phase of the digital revolution, if you like. And digital services, as they always do after a kind of global crisis, accelerate because new companies emerge off the pains that have been felt during this that push the boundaries of what people thought was possible before. I think 5G will be key. I think in the next, I guess, maybe 12 to 24 months when the telcos have finished building the basic infrastructure, it will certainly be more of a wow moment than what 4G was. For Varnish more specifically, there are a lot of opportunities within the sort of telco cloud edge data centers. It's certainly an area and a place to use our caching software because it covers the basic features of 5G, right? You want to execute logic at the edge of the network. You need sub-millisecond latency. You need to deliver 150 gigabits per second to tens of thousands, if you like, of concurrent users from a single server. And that's exactly what Varnish can do today. So I think the world's certainly about to change. We're really excited to take on the challenge as it happens. But my focus, the company's focus, and I guess the wider world's focus at the moment is dealing with the COVID-19 crisis, which is what we need to get through at the moment.
Well, I've absolutely loved having you on here today. But before I do let you go, could I ask that you remind everyone listening of where they can find out more information about Varnish Software or even contact your team if they're left with any additional questions?
Yeah, so varnish-software.com is the website. We've got a webinar on May the 14th around building your own CDN, which is hosted with DZone as well. So you can go on the website and have a look at that. And my LinkedIn is just James White at Varnish Software.
Excellent. Well, there's so much I love about what you're doing here, especially because it's this high performance content delivery that works with the major top 5 streaming providers in the US. I wish you the best of luck for the future. I think it's going to be incredibly exciting for you. And maybe next time we get you on, you'll be in Los Angeles. Here's hoping.
Fingers crossed. Thanks, Neil.
I really felt for James talking to him before we started recording here because he's packing up to go and live in LA, live the LA dream. With his company that works with the top 5 streaming providers in the US, with Varnish Software that works with the top 5 streaming providers in the US at the moment. But of course, the lockdown has just stopped all that. So he's stuck here in the UK where it's raining at the moment. So a big for James. But seriously though, I would love to get him back on this podcast in a few months when he is hopefully in LA and hear a few stories from him. But today, what I loved about the conversation was exploring that the industry needs to explore building instead of renting content delivery networks, and also exploring the importance of providing streaming viewers a fast experience in that oversaturated market. But finally, of course, how companies can benefit from web and API acceleration that is both faster and scalable. But we did cover a lot of ground in that conversation. So anything at all that you would like to discuss further, email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. Tweet me at Neil C. Hughes. If you've got any questions, you can do the same. If you'd like to work with me, my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. And if you're still left wanting more, I'm sure you're not, but if you still are, my book, Great TED Talks Innovation, is available on Amazon at the moment, and all the usual book stock is too. And if you still want more, I'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. We'll have another guest lined up for you. But more than anything, just a genuine thank you from yours truly for tuning into this podcast. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.